So last week we had a look at creating the scheme of work and looking at planning and how aims and objectives are really important when setting up both the scheme of work and eventually the lesson plan. And we're going to look a bit more in detail in that in today's activities. So first of all, we're going to review what we've done so far in the scheme of work planning and then start planning particular sessions. So I'll give you some time at the beginning of Monday's lesson to have a go at that and catch up where everybody is. Things to think about when you're session planning or designing whole courses, come to think of it, of all the external factors that cause you to plan in the way you do. So there's things like needs of industry and the interests of people that feeds in to what develops the curriculum. So is curriculum designed because people are interested, they want to learn that sort of thing? Or is it because industry says we need trained people in this particular field and that stimulates curriculum development? Then there's a whole theory behind how to design curriculum to meet the best needs of both industry and the people that are on the course, and that's something you'll look at next year when we're looking at curriculum design. Then that leads into the scheme of work. So this is probably where you're used to coming in at this level. The scheme of work takes on board what has been suggested for the curriculum, and then you know the learner's needs, so you can then develop what happens each week. And the scheme of work is really important to ensure that you include everything you need, you don't miss anything out, they get the best opportunity to learn, and that you might be able to bring in other things that help enhance the curriculum. Then after that, it's down to the individual sessions themselves. So getting them planned effectively to make sure that every individual is included in those sessions, and then individual outcomes and any plans that are associated with that. So within each lesson, you could have individuals working at different speeds on different things, all that sort of aspect of differentiation. So scheme of work, planning a session. We've looked at this scheme of work so far for the British culture course that we're setting up, and now we need to start looking at lesson plans. And we're going to develop session plans from those, whatever you've decided to happen each week. And we'll work on that in class. So things to think about when you are planning these sessions. Content, what you're going to deliver. Aims and outcomes. Aims and outcomes for that particular session, but also how that fits into the aims and outcomes of the whole scheme and how that fits into the curriculum overall. So there might be links to other modules, etc. Methods. What methods are you going to use to deliver this information, whatever it may be? The timing. So the timing of the whole class, how long is it going to be? Also individual activities. Is there time for breaks? Is there time to do, there's some activities take a lot quicker than others, and you've got to get that timing right to make the lesson flow and have a rhythm that makes the learners feel that they've just been brought along on this journey. Flexibility. Always have something in your mind there just in case you need it, because you don't know what's going to happen. So what you want is extension activities. So if you finish too early, or you've got students who are more able and have completed early, or you could have sessions in there, or particular methods that potentially could be dropped or moved on to next week if there's issues with people. I don't know, maybe the students have got really into one of the activities and are going deeper and deeper. Don't want to stop them doing that. So then maybe it's something you can take over to the following week. And bearing in mind all the time the learner profile. So is there something about each individual that you just need to consider when planning? And it's always good to have a copy, some sort of pen portrait. It doesn't have to be lots. Maybe just initials of each student and something key about each one. Are they high achievers, low achievers? Is there any issues about dyslexia, dyspraxia, something? Is there something that you just need to be aware of as you're planning? Other things that you need to think about when planning a session. Nature of information. So what is the information you're trying to get across? How do you think it's best transmitted? Because that can make a big impact on whether the students take it in or not. Size of the class, always important consideration. Your own strengths and limitations. So is the particular skills you're good at, or is there things that you may stumble and struggle across? And it's just things you've got to bear in mind. Resources available, time available. Motivation of the learners themselves, not necessarily overall, but it could be just for that particular session. Is it a Monday morning? Is it a Friday afternoon? Have they just had a physical activity session? What is it that they could come into your class and the motivation could be down? Or they could be hyper and well motivated, which has also got a management issue of itself. And the prior knowledge of the learners. How are you going to assess that? How are you going to know if they know it already? There's nothing worse than sitting there going, I know all this. So trying to get all that information in there, making sure you have variety of methods. So you're changing the style of delivery each time for the different activities you're doing, which is interesting, but also captures people's imagination and ability to learn in different ways. And that's what you've got to try and include in each session. So this is something we'll have a look at. There's a bit of a handout I want you to think about with some theory about lesson development. Structure of the session is very important, and traditionally you've got to think of lessons as having a start, middle and an end. So how are you going to start the session? How are you going to bring in the information then to really get the learning to happen in the middle? And then how are you going to review it at the end, or assess their progress? So you've got a start, middle and an end. An example from this diagram is how to start a session. So you could have, four things basically in the middle. Create some interest, provide some links, establish some entry behaviour and set the scene. So they're suggesting create interest. How are you going to start the lesson? It's no good going into it and going, today we're going to learn this, this and this. Now let's open a book and have a look at that. Maybe you could start by just posing a question and start it that way. Or maybe images for visual impact. Saw a great history lesson once where it was just images of they were just flashing on the screen, and the learners didn't know what was going on. They were thinking about it, and then the question was asked, well, what are these images about? And then they talked about it, and it turned out to be the impact of the Second World War on certain countries within Europe. And it was quite interesting. I saw a geography lesson just the same as well, where they talked about tourist attractions. No lesson, no discussion on it. Just here's the images. What are they? What do you think they're trying to show? How do you think they could be showing better? What explanation do you need? Provide links. So what you want to be doing in that individual session is bringing links from the previous session, the next session, and links to assessment. Always very important. And if you can, links to wider context, so outside world. What's this got to do with me? That's what the question is at this point. I've come to this lesson. You've told me we're going to discuss this. Why? And that's where the links are really important. What's it got to do with me? Establish some entry behaviour. So in there, it's talking about previous learning. What do they already know? What are you expecting them to do during the session? And how are you going to assess them? Then set the scene. So at that point there, you can share the objectives or introduce yourself, bring in some other aspects to talk about that particular topic. Now, if you notice, it's a circle. So you don't necessarily have to start at any particular point. I started at create interest because that's what would interest me. But you've got provide links, establish entry behaviour, setting the scene. They could all be manipulated and started at different times. And it's all up to you where you start, because you know your learners best and you know your topic best. So you just need to think about that. So that's the beginning. Then you're going to do some stuff in the middle, and we'll talk about that in class. Then at the end, what you're going to do. How are you going to conclude it at the end? So again, links. So I've learned all that. What have I got to do with it? Right, this is how it links to next lesson. This is what it's got to do with my assessment, and this is what it's got to do with me, basically, in the wider world. You could do a bit of evaluation, what they've learned, how they've learned, and whether there's anything they haven't learned. A bit of housekeeping, there's always in there. So any reminders, any tidying up, get them to do the tidying up. Not that I ever get you to do the tidying up, though. And then all the recap and assessment. So are you going to recap, summarise, get them to do that? What activities can you do? And how are you going to assess that each individual has progressed as you wanted? That's what's key at this point. So even if you've done group work, how do you know that each individual has grasped a bit of an understanding of what you're trying to get across? So there's some ideas to start and end a session, and that's a bit of structure around your session plan. Petty suggests an alternative where he's given a little indication about how long you should spend doing different things. So he suggested a maximum of 35% of the start of the lesson should be about presenting information. Then 60%, the big middle bit, should be applying it. So using a variety of methods to get them to do the thing you're trying to get across, which will then hopefully stimulate that long-term memory and get them to understand, grasp, and be able to synthesize what you're trying to say. And then a 5-minute review at the end. Now that all depends on your learners, the different levels they're at, and the content you're trying to get across. But I think he's just trying to get across the proportion of the structure of the session should be what should be presented, what should be actually doing stuff, students doing things, and then the review time. So it's worth thinking about that. Another one which I worked on when I did accelerated learning a few years back was something called message as a structure. And I really liked this one because it really helped me develop a structure where I could take on a lot of what's called metacognition and students learning to learn and really getting their heads around themselves as a student and the different ways they could get information. And this message, it starts off with something called mindset. So when they come into the room, you've got to get them switched on to learning. They're going to come with loads of baggage, loads of thoughts, loads of ideas. I don't know, the bus was late, there's no car parking, that sort of thing. There's stuff going on at home. How can you switch them onto learning within the classroom? And there's some ideas for that I can definitely pass on at a later date, where you get them to park whatever they're thinking and come back to it later. Or you get them to do an activity very quickly or something on the way in. Text messaging is brilliant for that, and I might try that with sometime in the future, where you'll get a text message before the lesson to get you thinking before you actually enter the session. So you sort of take away a little bit of that delay of them getting in and settling down before the session starts. Entrance. Now with entrance, that is basically set the scene, get them out there, tell them what it's all about, link to them, really explain to each learner what's it got to do with them. So there's a bit of a, oh, this is what we're going to do today, and this is the hook that's going to have you wanting more. Switch ownership, that's getting them to do the work. So whatever activities you choose, try and get them to do most of the work. Store, that's using memory techniques to try and get them to keep that information, using mnemonics, images, storytelling, whatever it might be. Act, get them to do something with it. Go again is the review period. So thinking about when could you review that activities that took place, which could be at the end, it could be at the middle. And I'll talk about something in class about that. And then engage, takeaway activity. They've learnt all this. When they leave the classroom, are they just going to forget it? No, give them something to take away and think about. So we're going to talk about variety and some ideas. Also about assessment as well, such as initial and diagnostic assessment, formative assessment, and summative assessment. That should come across in Andrew's lecture as well on Monday. And then we're going to jump back to the lesson plan and have a look. Put some of that stuff that we've just talked about right now into your lesson plans. And then what I'm going to do is gather them in and have a little assessment myself and have a look of where you're getting up to.